Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lecture given by Dr. David Suzuki. He kindly agreed to give us a lecture through modern technology. And I'd like to, my name is Vala Ragnarsdóttir, and I'm the Dean of Engineering and Natural Sciences. And next to me here is the rector of the university. Am I standing in front of her? Okay. Here she is. Kristín Ingólfsdóttir. And then here we have Dr. Kesara Jónsson, whom you have spoken with, and she is going to introduce you. Það sem hann sér, það sem hann sér þig, bara hún stendur hér.
So, shall I sit down or?
No.
I say good morning, Vancouver. Good morning, Dr. Suzuki. It's good seeing you at last, and happy 25th birthday again. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling very good, but you know, you have to look at the camera. You're looking at my picture on the screen.
Okay.
Now you're looking at me.
I'm so old-fashioned. I've never done this before. Okay. And can I look at the audience now? No.
Yes.
Okay, maybe I should be here.
No, that's fine.
Okay, greetings to the audience, Rector Professor Kristín Ingólfsdóttir and Dean Professor Kristín Vala Ragnarsdóttir, colleagues, students, and distinguished guests. My name is, try not to look at you. My name is Kesara Jónsson. I was trained as a botanist from Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, as plant gene ecologist from the University of Kansas in Lawrence, and later as molecular cytogeneticist from Cambridge, UK. For the past 30 years in Iceland, I have been working on genetic research of Icelandic flora. But first, I would like to thank our Dean for giving me the honor of introducing Dr. David Suzuki to you in this very special occasion to mark the celebration of our School of Engineering and Natural Sciences as part of the centennial anniversary of the University of Iceland. And congratulations on the 100 years old birthday. I'm very proud to be part of this academic establishment. Our guest of honor today is David Suzuki. We've been waiting for this moment, waiting to hear your talk and to have the opportunity to discuss with you on so many issues that concern us all. After all, we share the place we live in, as you would agree, the planet Earth. David Suzuki is known here among biology alumni, especially those studying genetics, reading your textbook, the IGA, or an introduction to genetic analysis. Others, of course, have known you from the television series, The Nature of Things by David Suzuki. I understand the latest episode entitled 50 Years of the Nature of Things was shown in CBC TV last week. Over the past 31 years that you have been hosting this TV series, The Nature of Things has traveled all of Canada and the world to bring the audience stunning visuals and remarkable behavior of countless of species of plants and animals. Over the years, the series has been shown in more than 80 countries, including Iceland. David Suzuki is not just a TV persona anymore, said my friend Alan Emery, a renowned marine biologist and former director of the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa. He told me on the phone when we were planning to contact you in the beginning, David is now a movie star, said Alan. It is indeed this movie that has made the event today a reality. I'm forever grateful to the director and producer of this film, Sturla Gunnarsson, who emailed you from India to introduce us at the University of Iceland to you in the first place. The movie, entitled Force of Nature by David Suzuki, was produced late last year by Entertainment One in co-production with the National Film Board of Canada and in association with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Sturla Gunnarsson himself is coming to Iceland to premiere this movie at the Icelandic Film Festival in September. But in order to prepare for the event today, Sturla has kindly given me the honor of viewing the movie. I believe that the lecture today will deliver messages similar to those in the movie, and therefore I hope that my Icelandic translation of náttúrunnar will be appropriate. In your own word, during our correspondence last December, you said, quote, "For my main talk, I would like to deliver my legacy speech, which is an editor's attempt to look back over my life in order to draw lessons to pass on to the coming generations." Ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, I give you David Suzuki.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be a part of your centenary celebration and to have this opportunity to share a few of my ideas with you today. I thank you also for allowing me to deliver this lecture by telepresence. I would love to visit Iceland, but we live in a carbon-constrained world where travel for me is becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Last week, I celebrated my 75th birthday. And at this age, there is no denying any longer that I am in the death zone, the last part of my life. As an elder, I can now enter what I think is the most important part of my life. You see, now I don't have any pressures of a drive for fame or money or power or sex. I can now reflect back on a life free of all of those complications and sift through a life of experience, asking what are the things that I would love to leave for the coming generations to consider. I give my legacy then with no hidden agenda. It is just the truth that comes from my heart. And in offering my thoughts, I hope that my words will stimulate each of you, even though you are much younger than me. I hope you will ask important questions of yourself. What is life all about? What matters most to me? What brings me joy and happiness? What would I like my legacy to be? You see, I believe that we are at a pivotal moment in all of human history, a moment when our actions or inactions will determine the very fate of our species. Now, I know that sounds very melodramatic to say that the survival or the extinction of our species may be at risk, but I believe we have come to that point in history. How did we arrive at this incredible moment? I have spent 35 years of my life as a geneticist and have watched in amazement as scientists have acquired the tools and the power to manipulate and analyze DNA. And one of the techniques that's now used is to take DNA and follow the movement of our species across the face of the planet. And all of the trails of humankind lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. We are all Africans in our very origins. Try to imagine what the world was like when our species appeared on this planet. There were still woolly mammoths in the world. There were saber-toothed tigers, giant moa birds 9 feet tall, huge sloths all over North America. The world was a very different place. And if we were to have a time machine to go back 150,000 years ago and hover above Africa, we would look down on animals in abundance and variety beyond anything that we would see in the Serengeti today. And we'd have to look very hard to see those little clumps of 2, 3, or 4 of those funny-looking two-legged furless apes, and that was us. Now, when you think of us in that context, when we appeared on Earth, we weren't very impressive. I'm sure no other species, when they saw us, said, "Oh, watch out for that animal, they're going to take over the planet." I mean, what did we have going for us? There weren't very many of us. We weren't very big. We weren't very fast. An elephant can outrun the fastest human being on Earth. We weren't very strong. A chimpanzee weighing 100 pounds could beat me up and probably every one of you in this room. And we weren't endowed with any special senses of vision or hearing. What kind of an animal were we to take over the planet in 150,000 years? Well, of course, the answer is the key to our success was invisible. It was the 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. It was that organ that compensated for our lack of physical and sensory ability. That brain had a memory beyond any mammalian species we know. It was curious and it was inventive. And those things compensated for our lack of physical and sensory ability. That brain learned from observation and trial and error. That brain invented new ideas that it could try out. That brain was aware of itself in time and space as no other mammal is. It could dream of a world yet to come, a future in which we could avoid dangers and exploit opportunities. I believe foresight, our ability to look ahead, was our great advantage. We could imagine a world yet to come and then work in the present to try to achieve that world that we could imagine. In only 150 millennia, we have come to dominate the planet. We have occupied every continent and spread across the world. And it's quite an impressive history. Consider just human population. It's thought when the agricultural revolution began 10,000 years ago, there were only 10 million human beings in the entire world. But then the agricultural revolution gave us a huge advantage, and in only 8,000 years, by the time Jesus Christ is thought to have been born, there were now 10 times as many people, 100 million human beings by at the beginning of the at 0 AD. Then we reached a population of 1 billion people in the early 1800s, about 1830. We reached 1 billion people, and then in less than 200 years, by the year 2000, we had reached 8.7 billion of us. So, 6.7 billion human beings. We are now the most numerous mammal on the planet. There's a principle in biology that the population of a species is inversely related to our size. That is, the smaller you are, the more of you there can be, and the bigger you are, the fewer there will be. So by the time you get to be a whale or an elephant, your numbers are in the tens of thousands. And that makes a lot of sense. The bigger you are, the more space and food and all of that it takes. Humans have broken this principle. We're a lot bigger than mice or rabbits or rats. And yet we are the most numerous mammal on Earth. And of course, we have done that by trade and by technology. So now that we are so numerous, just our numbers alone means every one of us, just to stay alive, we need air, we need water, we need food, we need clothes and shelter. Just to stay alive, we have a very large ecological footprint. That is, it takes a lot of air, water, and land to support each of us. And that means that our impact on the Earth is very heavy. But of course, we're not like mice or rats or rabbits. We have a huge amount of technology used on our behalf. Just looking at you in the audience, I can see you're all wearing clothes. I am sure Nobody in Iceland has a big field to grow cotton or to grow sheep for your wool. All of your clothing has come through technology from somewhere else. And then think of the food that you eat and the computers you use and the cars, and all of that technology is used on our behalf and increases our ecological footprint beyond any other species that has ever existed. But it doesn't end there. Even after the economic meltdown, I know that we all love to go shopping. We are consumers, and every bit of what we use comes out of the earth. And when we're finished with it, we'll throw it away into the earth. And that increases again our ecological footprint. And now we have a global economy. Even Iceland, way away, is caught up in a global economy that uses the entire planet as a source of raw materials, uses the entire planet to dump its waste and toxic materials. But the global economy hides the ecological and the social costs of what we are using. If you go to a store to buy a cotton shirt, I'm sure most of you would never ask, well, is this cotton shirt organic or not? Cotton is one of the most chemically intensive crops that we grow. And those areas in the United States and in the former Soviet Union where they grew large amounts of cotton have been ecologically very, very destructive. But we just want a shirt. We go in, we pay our money, we buy it without reflecting on the ecological or the social costs. If you use a computer, a television, or a car, there are a lot of metals in those products. Mining is one of our most ecologically destructive activities. But do we say, oh, before I buy this car, where did all these metals come from? What was the effect of mining on the people there, or on the communities that depend on mining, on the ecosystems around the mines? No, we don't ask those questions. We just want a car, we pay our money, we buy it, and we use it. And yet the very act of buying that product has ecological and social effects that stretch around the world. But the global economy hides those true costs. So when we add up all of those things, our population, our technological muscle power, our consumption, and our global economy, we have become a new kind of force on the planet. We as a species are now altering the chemistry, the physics, and the biology of the planet on a major scale. Only a few decades ago, we used to refer to hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and drought and fires as natural disasters or acts of God. But they aren't anymore. We know that the human imprint is now there on these events. Even earthquakes and volcanoes. We know that when we build dams, the weight of the water that builds up behind the dam actually upsets the movement of plates and increases earthquake activity and volcanoes. We have become a kind of force of nature. Scientists divide the ages of the planet into different epochs. These are periods determined by geological events. The Holocene, the Eocene, the Miocene, the Pleistocene, and so on. And the Nobel Prize winner, Paul Crutzen, has said this should be called the Anthropocene epoch, a time when human beings have become so powerful that we are now a geological force. But now we have scientists, we have supercomputers to put together our information and look ahead and see where the dangers lie and see where the opportunities are. And for over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we are heading down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities at shifting direction and going a different way. And for over 40 years, we've been turning our backs on the very strategy for survival that was the key to our success in leaving Africa and spreading around the world. Why then are we turning our backs on the very survival strategy of our species, looking ahead, seeing the dangers, and avoiding them to exploit opportunities. I think the challenge is this. In order to see what the scientists are telling us, it depends on how we look out at the world and see where we belong in it. You see, we all belong to a single species. The structure of our brains, the structure of our sense organs, the structure of our neurons are all the same. We're a single species. And yet when you look out at the world and see what's going on, we see radically different things. And that is because our perceptions are shaped by issues like gender, like socioeconomic class, by religion, by ethnicity, and so on. We don't just look out at the world and all see the same things. We see the world through perceptual lenses that are shaped by our own individual experience. Just ask an Israeli, ask a Palestinian about Gaza or Jerusalem, and you will get radically different perspectives. Ask a street person begging on the street and a business person about the economy or about welfare. Radically different answers. Ask a man and a woman about love or family or sex. You'd swear they came from different planets. We see the world through lenses that are shaped by our backgrounds and experiences. And I believe that our perceptions have been shaped by events very recently. A few years ago, I went to a village high up in the Andes Mountains in Peru. And there I found that the children are taught from the time they're very young that that mountain is an apu. Apu in their language means God. And as long as that apu casts its shadow on their village, it will determine the fate of everybody in that village. Imagine how those children, when they grow up, treat that mountain compared to a child in Canada who is told all their lives those mountains are filled with gold and silver. You see, the way that we see the world shapes the way that we treat it. Is a forest a sacred grove or simply timber and pulp? Is a river the veins of the land or an opportunity for power and irrigation? Is another species our biological relative or simply a resource or a commodity? Is our property a home or just more real estate? The way we see the world shapes the way that we treat that world. And I believe that something has changed fundamentally in the way we see the world over the last century. For most of human existence, we were a local tribal animal. We didn't have to worry whether there were people on the other side of the ocean, across a mountain or over a desert. We just had to worry about our own tribe and our tribal territory. And we understood for all that time we were a part of nature, and we depended on nature for our very survival and our well-being. Even in 1900, there were only 1.5 billion people in the world. There were only 16 cities with more than a million people. London in 1900 was the largest city with 6.5 million people. Tokyo was the 7th largest city with 1.5 million people. Most people in the world in 1900 lived in rural village communities. We were farmers. Most people in the world were involved in some aspect of farming. And when you are a farmer, you know that we are absolutely dependent on nature, that weather, climate, the seasons determine how your farming goes, whether you're successful. Farmers know that the amount of moisture in the soil in the summer is related to how much snow you get in the winter. Farmers know that you need insects to pollinate flowering plants. Farmers know that certain species of plants can take nitrogen out of the air and make fertilizer in the soil. farmers understand that we are a part of nature. Come ahead only 100 years to the year 2000. Now, in the year 2000, there are 6 billion people in the world, but there are now 400 cities with more than 1 million people. The 10 largest cities all had more than 11 million people. Tokyo is the largest city in the world with 26 million people. Can you imagine? Tokyo went from 1.5 million to 26 million in 100 years. And if you've ever been to Tokyo, you know people shouldn't live that way. I don't believe that's how people evolved to live. But in countries like Canada, the United States, Australia, 80 to 85% of our populations now live in big cities. So in 100 years, we've changed from a farming animal to a big city dweller. And in a big city, we see the world in a very different way. Toronto is the largest city in Canada. I have a friend who lives on the outskirts of Toronto, and he lives in a high-rise apartment that is completely air-conditioned. He goes down the elevator in the morning to the basement, gets into his car, which is air-conditioned, drives down the freeway, downtown Toronto, into the basement of his office, up into his office, completely air-conditioned. His building is connected through tunnels to huge shopping areas and food markets. He said to me, "David, I don't have to go outside for days on end." That's what we have become. So in a city, it's easy to think we don't need nature. As long as we have a few parks to go camping and playing in a city, we create our own habitat. We don't need nature. So in a city, our highest priority becomes our jobs, because you have to have a job to make the money to buy the things that you need. So in a city, our perspective shifts to where we believe the economy is the highest priority in our lives. And the consequence of that is that we have a prime minister who for 5 years has said, we can't do anything about climate change, it'll destroy the economy. So the Prime Minister of Canada has elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that keeps us alive. We had an environment minister in Alberta. Alberta is our oil province. And he said, environmentalists like Suzuki should understand we can't afford to do the things he wants us to do if the economy isn't strong and growing. So even the Minister of the Environment, whose job is to protect the environment, thinks the economy is our highest priority, and it will give us all the things we need to keep us happy and healthy. And we forget then the most fundamental fact. We forget in a city that we, however sophisticated we are animals. We are biological creatures. And we forget that, I believe, at our peril. And for me, I've learned from indigenous people in Canada and around the world, they refer to the earth as our mother. They don't mean that in a poetic or a metaphoric way. They mean it literally. They say that we are created out of the 4 sacred elements, earth, air, fire, and water. That we are made by those things that come from the earth. And we forget that. I want you to think in a different way then. The very first thing every one of us needed when we left our mother's body at birth was a breath of air. That first breath was to inflate our lungs and then to announce to the world, we have arrived. And from that point on, to the last breath we take before we die, we need air 15 to 40 times a minute. And we don't even think about it. I want you to think about that one breath we take. It's so easy. 2 to 3 liters of air deep down into the most intimate parts of our bodies, our lungs. And if you've ever seen a new set of lungs and touched it, you know, it's all squishy, mushy. It feels funny because the lungs are made up mostly of air. Our lungs contain 300 million alveoli, little cells, little compartments that are clustered like grapes around an alveolar duct. And we need so many of them to give the surface area to come into contact with the air. If you flatten all of the alveoli into 2 dimensions from one set of lungs, they would cover a tennis court. That's how much surface is all wrinkled up in our lungs. And each alveolus is lined with a 3-layered membrane called a surfactant. The surfactant reduces surface tension, so when the air hits it, it sticks or fuses. And instantly carbon dioxide from our bodies rushes out, oxygen and whatever else is in the air rushes in, and hemoglobin molecules in red blood cells grab onto the oxygen, and with each beat of our hearts, that oxygen is pumped to every cell in our bodies. And when you breathe out, you don't breathe all of the air in your lungs out. If you did that, your lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in your lungs even when you breathe out. So the point is, you can't draw a line and say the air ends here and I begin there. There is no line. The air is in us, it's stuck to us, and it's circulating through our bodies. We are air. You can't separate us from the air. And when you breathe out, the air very quickly mixes in that room. And if your rector has just taken a breath, within minutes, every one of you is breathing the air that was once in her body, and vice versa. When I say this, when there are children in the audience, I see them go, ooh, yuck. They think they have a bubble of air that belongs to them. But if I am air, and you are air, then I am you. We are linked in this thin matrix, this layer of air, to all people around the world. Not just with all people. That air links us to the trees and the birds and the worms and the snakes that are all using that matrix of air. We are air. And whatever we do to the air then, we do to ourselves. There's a wonderful thought exercise that an astronomer, American astronomer, Harlow Shapley, performed many years ago. He said, I want to follow one breath of air. How do you do that? 98% of the air is oxygen and nitrogen. We breathe it in. Oxygen and nitrogen go in our bodies. Much of the oxygen stays in our bodies. That's why we need air every minute of our lives. But 80% of the air is nitrogen, and some of the nitrogen stays in our bodies and reacts chemically. But 1% of the air is an element called argon. You've all had chemistry. You remember argon is an inert gas. It does not react chemically with anything. So you breathe it in, argon goes in your body, you breathe it out, argon comes right back out. So argon is a good marker or indicator of a breath of air. How many atoms of argon in one breath of air? Shapley calculates 3 followed by 18 zeros. 3 billion argon atoms in one breath. So let us again go back and follow a breath that comes out of Kasara's nose then. And within minutes, those 3 billion argon atoms are floating through the room, and every one of you is breathing gazillions of argon atoms from that one breath. But the doors will open, and out that breath will go across Reykjavik, across Iceland, across Europe, around the world. And according to Shapley, 1 year later, no matter where you are, South America, Africa, air is a single system. 1 year later, anywhere in the world, every breath you take will have about 15 argon atoms from that one original breath Kasara took a year before. So on that basis, every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were in the bodies of Joan of Arc and Jesus Christ. That every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were in the bodies of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That every breath you take will suffuse life as far as we can see into the future. So that's why indigenous people call air sacred. It gives life to us. It links us to all life in the world. It links us from the past to the present and into the future. Air surely should be regarded with reverence as a sacred element. We say that we're intelligent. We think we're the smartest creature in the world. What intelligent creature, knowing the role that air plays in our lives, would then proceed to use air to dump our most toxic chemicals and think that it's not going to affect us? We are air. Whatever we do to the air, we do directly to ourselves. And that's what I've learned from indigenous people. Science informs us that they are absolutely right. The earth is our mother. And it's the same with the other elements. Water. Every one of us is more than 60% water by weight. We're basically a big blob of water with enough thickener added so we don't dribble away on the floor. And of course, the water, we lose water all the time. It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our nose and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water. So when we have to drink water to fill us up, back up. And when we take a drink of water, do we think this is Reykjavik water or Vancouver water? Of course not. Water cartwheels around the earth by the hydrologic cycle. And any drink of water has got molecules that have come from all of the oceans of the world, evaporated off the canopy of the Amazon rainforest, off the steppes of Russia and the plains of Canada. We are water. We're made up of water. And whatever we do to the water, we do to ourselves. We are the earth, because every bit of the food that we eat was once alive. And most of it, well, maybe not in Iceland, but in Canada, most of it was grown on land in the soil. We take the carcasses of plants and animals, tear them apart in our mouths, and then incorporate the molecules of those dead plants and animals to make up our bodies. We are the earth because we are created by the life forms that we remove from the earth. We say we're intelligent. We use the earth to spray the most toxic chemicals known, or to put toxic chemicals into the land. And finally, we are fire. Every bit of the energy in our bodies that we need to move, grow, and reproduce, every bit of that energy is sunlight. Sunlight captured by plants, converted into chemical energy. Then we eat the plants or eat the animals that ate the plants, just capture that energy and store it in our bodies. And when we need that energy, we then burn those molecules and liberate the energy of the sun back out in our bodies. We are created by Mother Earth because we are created out of earth, air, fire, and water. As a geneticist, I've watched with interest as well at the way that we can use DNA and analyze the arrangement of every letter in DNA. And you know that in 2001, the human genome, 3 billion letters in the cell of a human being, had been determined, the exact sequence of 3 billion letters. And the amazing thing that came out of the Human Genome Project was the demonstration that over 95% of the genes in our cells are identical to the genes in the great apes, in the chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. They are our nearest relatives. Each of us carries thousands of genes identical to the genes in our pet dogs or our cats. We carry genes, thousands of genes identical to the genes in salmon, in eagles, in fruit flies, in dandelions and cedar trees. All of life is related to us through our shared evolutionary history. And if the rest of creation, other biological creatures, are our relatives, then surely we treat them differently than if we simply regard them as resources, pests, weeds, or vermin. And in an incredible act of generosity, the web of living things that are our relatives create, cleanse, and replenish the four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. It was the plants that created the oxygen-rich atmosphere that animals like us depend on. And to this day, all of the green things in the ocean and on land are constantly generating more oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. It is life that is a critical part of the hydrologic cycle and filters the water so that we can drink it. Life is every bit of our food, and life creates the soil on which we grow our plants. And all of the energy in our bodies is created by photosynthesis, by plants. And all of the energy in peat, dung, wood, coal, oil, or gas was sunlight captured by plants and stored so that we can liberate it by burning. So we forget, as city dwellers, that we are animals absolutely dependent for our survival and well-being on the four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and on the rest of life, biodiversity, to cleanse, create, and replenish those elements. As city dwellers, we focus on the economy and forget that the word economics comes from the same word as ecology. Ecos is the Greek word meaning household or domain. Ecology is the study of home. Economics is the management of home. What ecologists try to do is to determine what are the principles, the conditions, the laws that determine whether a species can survive and flourish. I would have thought those would be the most important bits of information we could possibly get. I would have thought that any group, governments, corporations, individuals, before starting a new program would say, oh, wait a minute now, what are those ecologists, what are those principles, what are those rules and conditions? Because we don't want to do anything that will upset those ecological principles. But no, we elevate the economy above ecology. Let's put the eco back into economics. I'm told by politicians over and over again, David, you have to be realistic. The economy is the bottom line. Well, I see a radically different bottom line. The laws of physics determine the way that we live. The first and second law of thermodynamics tells us we cannot build a perpetual motion machine. The law of gravity says you can't have an anti-gravity machine here on Earth. The speed of light, we cannot create a rocket that will go faster than the speed of light. Those are physical principles that determine the way that we live. In chemistry, there are principles as well, diffusion constants, reaction rates, that tell us exactly what kind of chemicals that we can put together and react them, how long it will take, and what kind of molecules we can synthesize. Those are determined by principles of chemistry. And in biology, there is the reality that biology dictates we as biological creatures have an absolute need for clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy, and biodiversity. Without those things, we sicken and die. Those are principles that emerge from science. Other things, corporations, economics, economies, free enterprise or capitalism, currency, market, these are not forces of nature. We invented them. And if they don't work, we got to change them. Those are the ones. You can't change the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, but you can change the ideas behind economies, corporations, currency, and so on. I think that those are the things that we have to focus on to change so that we can live in balance with the earth. You know, it wasn't long ago that people believed in dragons and demons and monsters. We really believed that they existed. And if we thought they were mad at us, we would give them gold and jewels, anything to keep them from being mad at us. Well, today we know there aren't demons or monsters or dragons. Nobody believes in that. But what do? We replace them with another human invention called the economy. And boy, if we think the economy's in bad shape, do we get scared and, read the papers. The economy's not looking too healthy today. Do we get worried and we want to give them... Look at what happened when the 2008 economic meltdown. What happened? President Bush and then President Obama began to shovel hundreds of billions of dollars back into the banks that created the crisis in the first place. Pump billions of dollars into the auto sector that without any strings to say, look, you got to change the way that you do your business. We just pumped that money in there and said, please, please, please get back up running and growing and doing things the way you were before the meltdown. This is crazy. Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. This is crazy. The economy, we constantly attempt to make nature abide by our economic ideas. If our economy goes down in British Columbia, we say to the logging companies, oh, well, you can cut more trees because we know that we need to get more income coming into the economy, and to hell with whether this is sustainable or not. Or we say to a company, you can pollute the river more because it costs money to prevent pollution, so you can go ahead when we have an economic downturn. We always ask nature to abide by our economic problems. We compound the problem by elevating other human constructs to a high position. We draw lines around our property, around our cities, around our countries. And boy, we take those borders very, very seriously. We will go to war, we will kill and die to protect those borders. But I'll tell you a secret. Nature doesn't care about human borders. Look at the tragedy in Japan right now in Fukushima nuclear plant. Do you think nature says, oh, I'm Japanese water or I'm Japanese air, we have to stay within the boundaries of Japan? Of course not. Do we think that migrating birds or mammals or fish or insects stop at the border and say, oh, I'm a Canadian fish, I can't go any further? Nature doesn't care about human borders. And yet look at what happened last year in Copenhagen. 192 countries coming together to negotiate the atmosphere which doesn't belong to anybody. And we negotiate the atmosphere through the lenses of 192 national borders and 192 national economies. And different countries have different economic priorities, and we try to negotiate the atmosphere. It can never work because we think our creations, our economies, our boundaries are more important than paying attention to what nature's needs and boundaries are. So I'm sorry, Kasara, can I go on for another 5 minutes or so?
Yes.
Do.
Yes.
I'd like to look at this economic system itself, because the economic system is, I believe, at the heart of our problem. You see, an economy is made possible by the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. That's how we make our living within the biosphere. The astronomer Carl Sagan said if you reduce the Earth to the size of a basketball, the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists, would be thinner than a layer of varnish that you paint on that basketball. That's it. That's where all 30 million species live. And that's how we gain an economy. We use that thin layer around the basketball to extract all of our resources and to dump all of our toxic wastes. And yet, the economic system ignores the fact that that biosphere is performing all kinds of activities that keep us alive and healthy. Take a forest. When you look at a forest, economists say, well, there are jobs from cutting the trees and making pulp, or cutting the trees and making lumber, and maybe a few drugs that you can get out of it, a few other kinds of products. But that forest, as long as it's standing, is taking carbon dioxide out of the air, putting oxygen back in it. You know what economists call that? They call that an externality. And what they mean is they don't care. It's not a part of the economic system. And that's why businesses scream bloody murder when you talk about putting a tax on carbon. Putting carbon in the atmosphere should be taxed, and they say no, the air should be free to just use it to dump our toxic chemicals. And a forest is one of the ways of keeping that atmosphere healthy for us, but economists don't regard that as a part of the economy. That forest is pumping huge amounts of water out of the soil and liberating it into the air, affecting weather and climate. That's an externality. That forest is providing pollinators, bats and birds and insects that pollinate flowering plants and keep terrestrial ecosystems going. That's an externality. The tree roots hold the soil so it doesn't run into the rivers and spoil the salmon spawning beds. That's an externality. So all those things that a forest is doing to keep the planet healthy is regarded by economists as irrelevant to the economy. And it's no wonder then that economics is such a destructive system to pay attention to. But I'm going to conclude by pointing out the most egregious part, the worst part of this current economic system. Economists think they're so smart that the economy can grow forever. We live in that thin layer around the basketball. It can't grow. What can grow, thinks it can grow forever? The only system I know that thinks it can grow forever is cancer. Cancer and economists think growth, steady growth forever is possible, and it's not. And I'm going to show you, we've come to think growth is the very definition of progress. Ask any politician or business person, how well did you do last year? And within seconds, they will talk about growth in the GDP, growth in jobs, growth in market share, growth in profit. Growth has become the definition of progress. But what is growth? Growth just describes the state of a system. Growth by itself doesn't do anything for us. And yet if we think that growth is the most important thing, we don't ask important questions like, what is an economy for? How much is enough? Are there no limits? Are we happier with all this stuff? We don't ask those questions. It's just, we got to keep the economy growing, growing, growing. Now I'm going to show you why this is suicidal. Anything growing steadily over time, whether it's the amount of garbage you make, the number of fish you catch, the size of your city, the population of your country, anything growing steadily over time is called exponential growth. And anything growing exponentially has a predictable doubling time. Okay? So if it's growing at 1% a year, it will double in 70 years. 2% a year, it'll double in 35 years. 3%, 24 years. 4%, 17 and a half years. Anything growing exponentially has a predictable doubling time. I'm going to give you a system analogous to the planet. It's a test tube full of food for bacteria. That's the planet. And I'm going to put one bacterial cell in, and that's us. And that one bacterium is going to grow exponentially. Every minute, it's going to double. Okay? So at the beginning, time 0, there's one cell. 1 minute, there are 2. 2 minutes, there are 4. 3 minutes, there are 8. 4 minutes, 16. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely packed with bacteria, and there's no food left. So it's a 60-minute growth cycle. When is the test tube only half full? Well, of course, the answer is at 59 minutes. It's been going for 59 minutes. It's only half full, but 1 minute later, it'll be completely full. So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. 57 minutes, it's 12.5% full. 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes, one of the bacteria said, hey guys, we got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, Jack, what the hell have you been drinking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty, and we've been around for 55 minutes. And they'd be 5 minutes away from filling it. So bacteria are no smarter than humans. At 59 minutes, they go, oh my God, Jack is right. We got 1 minute left. What are we going to do? Well, give some money to somebody. Don't give it to those economists. Give it to those scientists. And in less than a minute, those scientists invent 3 more test tubes full of food for bacteria. So they're saved. They've quadrupled the amount of food in space. So what happens? At 60 minutes, the first test tube's full. 61 minutes, the second's full. At 62 minutes, all 4 are full. By quadrupling the amount of food in space, and that would be like us finding 3 more planets that we could start using immediately. By quadrupling the amount of food in space, you buy 2 extra minutes. And we're not going to find another planet anywhere nearby. The planet, the biosphere, is fixed. It can't grow. And every scientist I've talked to agrees with me. We're already past the 59th minute. So all of this talk about we've got to have more, we've got to grow, means that we've got to accelerate what is a suicidal path. Now when I say this to politicians and business people, they get very, very angry at me. How dare you say that? Look at our stores, they're filled with stuff. Look at our people, we're living longer, we're healthier. I say it without apology. We have created the illusion that everything is all right by using up the rightful legacy of our children and our grandchildren. You don't have to believe me. I am sure even in Iceland, if you talk to an elder who's lived in Iceland for 80 or 90 years, ask them, what was it like here when you were a child? I've been to the Amazon. I've been to the Serengeti in Africa. I've been to Japan and Australia. And I try to find the oldest person in a community. And I ask, what was it like when you were a child? And all of them say the same thing. It used to be so different. There used to be trees as far, well, maybe not in Iceland, but in most places in the world, there used to be trees as far as you could see. There used to be fish that would jam the rivers at certain times of the year. There used to be birds that would make the sky black. All over the world, our elders are a living record of enormous changes that have happened in the span of a single human life. We are using up the rightful legacy of our children and grandchildren, all in the name of economic growth. And I am absolutely sure that future generations, if there are still future generations, will look at us in amazement and said, why did you think you needed more? Why did you think that you had to use up our future just to keep the economy growing during that lifetime? Didn't you ever think to ask, gee, how much is enough? Do we really need all of this stuff? I'm sorry, I've gone on too long. I don't have time now to give you my conclusions as to where we go in all of this?
Yes, yes, please.
Yes, you do. You do.
We would like to hear it.
Well, let me tell you one story. My great hero, the person that taught me everything I know that was important, was my father. And when my father was 85, he was dying of cancer. He was not in pain, and he knew he was dying. He was not afraid to die. And I moved in to live with my father the last month of his life. Now, he was never a wealthy man, but when I was with him that last month, he would say again and again, "David, I die a rich man." In all the time that I was with him that last month, and we laughed and cried and looked at pictures and films together, all that time he never once said, "David, do you remember that closet full of fancy clothes that I had? Do you remember that big car I bought in 1985? Or that house that we used to own back in London, Ontario?" Never once. That's only stuff. All we talked about were family, were friends and neighbors, and the things we did together. And that, to my father, was his wealth. The experiences with other people built over a lifetime. And that is what he considered his riches, and he was truly a wealthy man. Yet we've got off in this weird idea that having more, having bigger and newer stuff, that this is what makes us happy. And I absolutely guarantee you that is not, in the end, as you come to the end of your life, as I am coming to the end of mine, that is not what you are going to be happiest thinking about. It is not going to bring you joy or pride as you think back on your life. We've got off on a very weird tangent. So what is the challenge then? What do we have to do? I believe that what we have to do is to look at the world and dream a different future. Our great strength, our secret, was the ability to look ahead, imagine a world, and then work to achieve that world. And that's what we have to do today. First of all, we have to slow down. Get to know our children. Get to know our neighbors. And think about what we are leaving for our grandchildren. And then think about how we can live. Imagine a world where all of the fun and the action is going on right in your neighborhood, where we work, live, and play in the same area so that we don't need a car. We just want to go out of the house, onto the street. That's where all the fun and action is. Imagine every building, every road, capturing all of the sunlight that falls on it to convert it into electricity, while every roof on a building captures water and grows food. Imagine cities filled with orchards of fruit and nut trees and community gardens where we celebrate the seasons through the food that is growing in our neighborhood. Imagine extracting heat, as you do in Iceland, from the soil or from the water, and returning that heat back in the summer. Imagine communities self-sufficient in food, in energy, and water, where disposability is no longer an acceptable word. If someone says, "I've got a disposable cup," you cover your children's ears and say, "That man just said a very bad word." That's what we have to create, where garbage and sewage become opportunities through endless copying of nature through cycles, where our waste becomes an opportunity for another system. Imagine cancer and asthma rates plummeting as we stop putting toxics into earth, air, and water. Imagine zero production of waste because we design industrial systems like nature. You know, in nature, when an elephant poops on the plains, immediately insects and fungi jump on that and say, "Oh, yummy, lunch." And that's what we have to design our industrial system. Imagine being able, as I was as a child, to drink water out of any river or lake, or catch a fish and not worry about what chemicals are in it. Imagine Canada covered in forests that we could log forever because we're logging the right way. Imagine lighter than airships, carrying vast loads over great distances at very low carbon, with a very low carbon footprint. Imagine an economy that is in balance with nature's productive capacity and incorporates nature's services as part of what it is. I could go on and on. These are not pie-in-the-sky dreams. These are all things that people are actually doing in different parts of the world. So let us go on and dream of a future and imagine what is possible, and then get on with the business of working our way towards that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you've spent a lot of time watching television. I hope it was almost as good as my being there.
In fact, I did watch 10 times, and every time I wanted to cry. And always wanted to be a better person, you know, to find a border, a limit to what is enough. And of course, it's depressed, you know, to know that we are in the last minute of the 60-minute cycle. But again, it's wonderful to hear your conclusion that if we all work together as individuals towards making a better world for our children, grandchildren. So at least I think we can die, you know, without worries. So I think I give this floor back to Professor Christine Valla, the Dean.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent lecture. And look in the right direction. Okay.
That's okay.
It looks different. The camera looks different than you.
Yes.
It is a wake-up call for many people to hear a lecture like yours. And we are here in a university. So my question is, why are the universities educating people, and who are actually steering the destruction of the planet?
Well, I can't.
How can you change that?
That's a very good
PhDs
point.
from the best universities in the world. Many of them.
I can only speak for what I know in Canada and the United States. But I can tell you, I went to school in the United States thanks to a scholarship that I got. It was a small liberal arts college. This is back in the 1950s. And in those days, there was a strong belief in the educated person. I received an education that was supposed to get me, prepare me to go out into the world in whatever area I ultimately chose, but as a thinking person, aware in a bigger way. I received a liberal arts education at Amherst College in Massachusetts. I did an honors degree in biology, but I was never allowed to take more than half of my courses in science. I had to take courses in literature, in philosophy, in history, because it was considered a part of what a well-educated person had. But now, I've spent 40 years of my life as a professor at the University of British Columbia. This is a gigantic university that sees itself as a training ground for people that are going to go out into society. That's going to train doctors and nurses and foresters and business people, and no longer clings to the notion of an educated person that sees in the bigger picture. So that we graduate students with a Bachelor of Science degree who only have to take one course in their freshman year outside of science. They're going to go out and practice with some of the most powerful technologies ever invented. Genetic engineering, computer technology, nanotechnology, space research. You better learn some philosophy and history, it seems to me. But we're just cranking them out without regard to the context, the bigger picture within which they will act. And we are cranking out people with a Bachelor of Arts degree who may have had one token course in science. They're going to go out and deal with a world in which the most powerful force shaping their lives is science, when applied by industry, medicine, and the military, and yet they will be incapable of assessing even the simplest details of what are the implications of cloning or stem cells or genetically modified organisms. We need to have a broader education than just that kind of focused training, it seems to me.
So that the education is too boxed in and people don't have a view of the whole.
In North America, I believe it.
And I think this is also true elsewhere in the world. So this is what we need to change. And we as educators need to take this very seriously.
I believe
now,
it.
I'd like to open the floor to questions. Any question from the audience? Yes, over there. It's a young man.
Thank you for a very good lecture. My question is, do you think we need to limit childbirth anytime soon? Is this as a for a whole, for the whole planet?
Do we need to limit child? Yeah.
Limit childbearing, like population?
Population, yes.
I asked E.O. Wilson, who is probably one of the world's leading ecologists at Harvard University, I said, how many people could live on the planet forever, sustainably? And he said, if you want to live like Canadians or Americans, 200 million. So even if we forget the developing world, there are 5 times too many of us in the rich countries. Now we can't, the big problem is we're coming to a real crisis in which ecosystems are collapsing and the transition time is getting too short. We've got to get off fossil fuels, we've got to reduce our consumption, I mean so many challenges, and we've got to reduce population. Now, we know what the best contraceptive is in the developing world. If you focus on women, you educate women and provide them with a tiny bit of financial security, you'll find that birth rates drop. We know that. We've seen it happen in India, we've seen it happen in Indonesia. But we don't, in North America, ever since Ronald Reagan, we've cut back on family planning, aid to the developing world because it's associated with abortion. Now, but I think that we've got to focus on allowing the developing world to have some kind of economic stability so they don't have to have all kinds of children for their old age. But that's going to take time. Meanwhile, we in the rich countries, our birth rates are already coming down to balance or dropping below the sustainable level. And that's all good. We've got to decrease our population. But the problem is in Canada, the tie between population growth and economic growth is very tight. So we think that to keep the economy growing, we have to have economic growth. Canadians are not replacing ourselves, so instead we're using immigration as a way of keeping our population climbing. We've got to stop that. We've got to begin to reduce our population and at the same time reduce our consumption. We in the rich countries are using over 80% of the planet's resources, produce over 80% of the planet's toxic waste, and leave 20% for the rest of the world. And it's just not fair. So the only opportunity is for us to reduce our hyper-consumption. The problem is we've created an economy that depends on our consumption. After the tragedy of 9/11, George Bush's first speech to the American public he said to them, "I want every American to go out and shop." That wasn't a joke. 70% of the American economy depends on consumption. And the problem is this: my parents grew up during the Depression, the Great Depression. And so they taught us, you have to work hard to make money to buy the necessities in life. But you don't run after money as if having more money or stuff makes you more important or a better person. But today, we run after not necessities in life, we run after what we want. I want the next iPad. I want the next iPod. I want the next fashionable clothing. I want the next biggest car. There's no limit to what we want. And we've got to go back to what do we need and focus on that.
Thank you very much. Is there another question from the floor?
You think I can steal one?
Huh? Yes?
I would like
That's
to,
why you're
There's one there in the back.
I was thinking about, well, I want to thank you for your lecture. It was very good. I want to ask about, today we hear voices like yours. They talk about sustainability. We need a word that sustains itself. But we have a world that has countries that want to share our ability of consumption. So what is the answer there? What can we do?
That's a very, very good question. And what we have to do, first of all, the challenge is in the rich countries. And I know that Iceland has had an economic meltdown, but the reality is you are still one of the wealthy countries. We in the wealthy countries have to share some of our wealth. And that doesn't mean bringing poor people from where they live to where we live. You don't convert a low ecological footprint population to a high ecological footprint. We've shared some of our footprint with the poorer countries. Let the people stay where they are. But at the same time, we have to reduce our consumption and become much more self-sufficient. But we live in an interconnected world. And poverty, hunger, genocide, war, injustice, inequity, those are all things that prevent us from coming to a sustainable world. Hunger and poverty are my issues. A starving person isn't going to care whether plants or animals are endangered. They're going to kill them to stay alive. So these are all issues we've got to deal with, and there's a huge responsibility on us who live in democracies and live in wealthy countries. We've got to share much more and reduce our fundamental needs. The crisis is time. The crisis is in the time frame. Many environmentalists now are saying it's too late. Jim Lovelock, the man who coined the phrase Gaia to describe all of life on Earth. Clive Hamilton, the Australian philosopher, has written a book called Requiem for a Species, and the species the Requiem for is us. They feel that we've gone past too many tipping points that we can't go back. And let me end by saying, I tell people who say to me it's too late. It is very, very late. But I tell people who say it's too late, please shut your mouth and go away. There's no point saying it's too late. We must always cling to that sense of hope. If you have children or grandchildren, you can never say it's too late. You have to fight right to the end. It is very, very late. And let me say, I believe we don't know enough about nature to say it's too late. And let me end on a very happy story. The most prized species of salmon in the world is the sockeye salmon. It's a species whose flesh is bright red and very oily. It's a wonderful fish. And the biggest run of sockeye salmon in the world is in the Fraser River in British Columbia. A good run of sockeye salmon is of the order of 25 to 35 million salmon in a year. 2 years ago, the Fraser River sockeye run was down to just over 1 million. And I was ready to write a requiem for the Fraser River sockeye. I thought they'd had it. It was just too small a run. 1 year later, we got the biggest sockeye salmon run in 100 years. Nobody knows what the hell went on. We have no idea what happened. But nature, we don't know enough to say it's too late. And nature, I believe, has a lot of surprises. Many of them are going to be very bad, but I cling to the sockeye run in the Fraser and say, if we can give nature a chance, give her some room and time, I believe that nature will do some things that we don't deserve, but will be good for us. So we can never give up hope, but remember it's very, very urgent to act now. Thank you very much.
For bringing you here to us via the technology with some flowers that you can see here, but she will enjoy.
When I saw this bouquet at 4 o'clock, I thought, are you giving to Dr. Suzuki? Anyway, you see the picture?
I do.
And I understand that our information officer will be recreating, or actually making this film accessible to wider audience, because economies and ecology are central to everyone, not just to scientists.
Thank you. Are those flowers grown in Iceland?
Yes, I hope so.
Yes.
They are. In our greenhouse.
Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.